I'd like to welcome David Sime, futurist and director at Encore Reality. Encore Reality tailors immersive digital environments for the education, commercial, corporate, construction, and energy industries. David, thanks so much for joining me to discuss 2D UX upskilling to AR/VR. How does the design methodology change when you move from 2D to designing for augmented and virtual realities?
Well, there's a few changes between the way that traditional UX has worked and the way that it works in immersive environments. One of these, I suppose, is more fundamental than just the technology and the point at which people come in, and that is that in 2D and in most of these sort of situations, it tends to be more, traditional ones tend to be more linear, chronological interface, if you know what I mean. It really depends on the tool or the task. But if you think of video, it starts at the beginning, you watch it through to the end. If you're entering a website, you enter generally on a landing page and you progress through it in a linear fashion from one page to another to another. You may have routes that you can change or whatever, but it does tend to be linear and kind of chronological in its basis. Whereas with immersive environments, virtual reality, and to an extent augmented reality, it's not predicated in that. It's more based on the actual spatial movement, if you know what I mean. So to move from one area to another, you have to pass through them. You can make choices as to where you look at any given point. You can make choices as to where you want to go at any given point. To a certain extent, this can be restricted, where it kind of funnels you in a certain direction, but that tends to be limited, or at least limited to the extent where you shouldn't know that you're being funneled, or you shouldn't know that you're being shepherded, because it can reduce the experience. So the user experience is very different. I would say that in terms of UX design, it tends to be based more around beta testing than anything, literally just throwing people into that environment who are unfamiliar with it and just letting them test it out. And similarly, as we do with websites, where we use obviously things like heat mapping tools and so forth to, like mouse flow and clicktail, to see where people are getting lost or what's working for them or what they're clicking on. We just observe. I think there's a problem by using UX specialists in these situations, because they become familiar with how to use the environments. They've become familiar with how these things work, which means that the better they are at it, the worse they are at it, if you know what I mean, because they cease to be representative of the decisions that an average user would make, because they have this innate instinctual knowledge of, all right, okay, I see what's happening here. I've been in an environment like this before. Whereas we need to make sure that our environments work for, I hesitate to use the phrase, the lowest common denominator. And what I would suggest is that where UXers become useful is where they observe. Now, they can observe, they can be invisible within that environment, but they can be literally following the user around and watching what they do, taking notes. The advantage to that is that the user is unaware that they are being ghosted in this way, that somebody is observing them, which removes observational bias, which means that they do behave naturally. You almost have to approach it as you might with a medical study, however, where some of them might be aware that they're being observed, some of them might be told that they're not being observed, and that way you can have control groups. But mainly, it's a qualitative and a quantitative analysis. You need a relatively good number of people so that you can work out on average who's responding to what.
And who... that begs another question, because usually in 2D design, you're doing the quantitative UX research before you begin mapping the user journey. But in immersive, then isn't there a program that maps and collects quantitative information off that experience in real time, so that you're always collecting quantitative information throughout the design process where you wouldn't be in a 2D design project? Or, I mean, is there like a program running that's making quantitative measures of that experience throughout?
I'm afraid not. And unfortunately, when we're dealing with virtual reality, as of yet, there isn't actually a system akin to a heat mapping tool, because there's too many variables. And I dare say one will be developed, but as of yet, we have to do this manually. So the way that we define quantitative in this case is a far lower, well, quantity or volume of feedback than you would be able to achieve with your average UX analysis. What I would say is it's more akin to the qualitative quantitative research that you might carry out in market research, where instead of starting with quantitative, you start with qualitative. You actually observe very, very deeply people that aren't aware that they're being observed. You know, in marketing, we would start with a focus group, and then we would use the results of the focus group to create a quantitative research study, like a broader survey, in which case we would be able to take the findings from the smaller qualitative study and work out whether they're or could generate statistically significant analyses based on those questions. This is similar in that you would start off by observing a small number of people very, very closely, and then you would place a larger number of people in that environment as a beta test and then quiz them at the end of it and say, did you encounter this? Did you encounter this? Was it a problem with you finding this? And that way you don't have to observe everybody, but it's still much more of a manual process. Obviously.
And so you're relying first on qualitative measures, and then you're deconstructing to get the quantitative piece, right?
Exactly.
But it ekes out by doing the qualitative research first, by shadowing them unknowingly. You take the bias out of the qualitative measure, right? Which make it more pure, so that you can then say the quantitative measure gained from deconstructing the qualitative experience is more sound and true. Is that right?
It's more sound and true, but obviously we always have the limitations of these smaller qualitative studies, in that the results aren't necessarily large enough to be statistically significant. So what we then do is we take what would appear to be the trends, and we broaden them out into something where we repeat the questions, saying, okay, we noticed, for instance, that 5 out of 5 users that passed through this made a wrong turn or didn't know to click on this particular object. And then when we do beta out to a larger number of people in response for their qualitative feedback, their survey feedback, we say, did you know what to click on, or did you take a wrong turn? And that way, yes, so we do have a sounder starting point, but we still have to verify that this wasn't just a fluke, which may be repeated over a small number of times, but wouldn't over a larger amount of times.
Well, is the reason we don't have a qualitative software yet because there's so many points to take into consideration in an immersive environment, that you said that's coming. I would think that would be like an area where there's startups looking at that right now. And if there is, and would that render in a 2D and a 3D, 4D design cycle, quantitative people that do specific quantitative research unnecessary?
I don't. It's a good question. I suspect, at least initially, we're at the kind of initial frontiers of immersive tech. So therefore, a lot of this stuff has been created in a very bespoke fashion. So one VR system can be very, very different from another in terms of the way that people pass through it. As time goes on, these things become more and more standardized, as we saw with websites originally, where they all had different structures, and then they eventually settled on an index page followed by special pages and a number of different, okay, you had your standard e-commerce structure, and you have your standard brochure site structure, but all of these things had to kind of settle into place when people had kind of eventually discovered what was best practice. And that enabled the likes of ClickTail, Mouseflow, Crazy Egg to appear in the market, because they knew what they were analyzing. They knew roughly what the structure would be, roughly what the programming language would be, etc. We're not quite there yet in terms of the actual Yes, that's right. So it makes trying to create something which can analyze these things. Well, I would think very difficult, if not impossible, at this stage. But it will get, and I'm actually seeing a degree of standardization appearing already. But it's still early days. I think that we.
Interesting. And then, when you do 2D design, you also have documentation and visual library standards that you use. Is the visual UX design component different in 3D, 4D than it is in 2D?
Yes, I would say so. Again, it's very, very varied. And this is mainly thinking about these are interesting questions that you're raising here because it's making me realize just how kind of Wild West we are at this stage, how rough and ready it is. But the limitations that we have are mainly hardware based. So, for instance, with augmented reality, you're limited by the device that you're using, the connection strength that you have, and speed that you have, and therefore, for the most part, with augmented reality, we use the 3D engine Unity because it lends it's lighter, it's smaller, it can create 3D graphics which can be handled on a mobile phone and a slower connection. In virtual reality, you have a choice where you can use either the Unity 3D engine or the Unreal 3D engine. These are both gaming engines that were both developed in the.
Are they both made by the same manufacturer?
Oh no, no, no! They're very much the competitors. It's like the YouTube to the other one's Vimeo, if you know what I mean.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. So 3D Unity and Unreal, in VR, you have a choice. When you say you have a choice, is that around the graphics that you can create?
yes, actually, I mean, there's not a great deal of difference in them at the moment. It's very much a two-horse race in this industry between Unity and Unreal. Unity is faster and lighter, but not as pretty. And Unreal is bigger and heavier, but very, very pretty. It can do incredible light sourcing and levels of detail and so forth. But that said, that's the case at the moment. It's
Now, is
entirely
3D Unity a platform?
it's not a platform, although it can be used as a platform. It's funny, actually, the people who have built it are working in the direction of making it something which can be a platform in its own right. And certainly for testing of apps, we do use it for that sometimes. But it's not a fully formed platform. It's
What is
more
it?
of a it's more of a how can I describe it? It's almost like a language. It's almost like you get different coding languages for different purposes, like C sharp and C plus plus. It's a bit like that, where you have different ones that have different strengths for different purposes.
Would that be the responsibility of the new kind of UX visual designer in a 3D, 4D environment? Would that belong to them?
Well, it depends. For the most part, the people who develop virtual reality are virtual reality developers. They're not really defined. They don't define themselves as UX designers or developers. They're just virtual reality developers. So that is more split up between people who specialize in the graphics and the modeling. So the graphics is more the appearance, and the modeling is more the shape. Um, and then you will have people who are good or bad at animation. You will have people who are good or bad at user experience. But again, it's very rough and ready because there's
Right
so few.
now. And so the
Right.
modeling you said is the shape, and what did you say the other was?
The graphics is the appearance.
Oh,
So
appearance. Okay, so
yeah,
out of 3D Unity and Unreal, it gives you uh, it would be used by a partial reality developer. One would do the appearance, and then one would do the modeling, which is the shape, right?
just need to stop you there. I wish I could. I wish I could give you more clean-cut definitions, but in many cases, the same person that does the modeling does the graphics, and in many cases, it very much depends on the skills of the developer. In some cases, you can create an entire system with one person who can do everything, and in some cases, you need 15 people, all of whom are specialists. And this isn't actually to do with necessarily the complexity of the build. It's frequently to do with just the skill sets of the individuals involved.
So,
I,
so, so yeah, go ahead.
for instance, am very lucky in that I have two developers, one of whom is a specialist in Unity, which is the augmented reality, lighter, not as pretty, but very flexible system. I have another developer who is a specialist in Unreal, who's doing more handles virtual reality and the extremely pretty stuff. They're both polymaths, though. They're both capable of doing modeling, graphics, user experience, and even audio. They can do everything. The only issue with that is they don't play well with others. Not that they're argumentative, it's just that they're so used to handling everything themselves that when I try to place them within a broader team, they lack the ability to communicate their requirements because they've never had to do that.
Do they have interoperability between Unity and Unreal? So like you could use 3D Unity to do certain parts of the design, but you find Unreal better for another. Is it like Apple, which is closed architecture?
That's a good question, Ella. With Apple, it doesn't play with Android deliberately because they've created a closed ecosystem, so that's very much a deliberate move on their part. In the case of Unity and Unreal, they are actually just fundamentally different bits of different approaches to similar ends. So the reason that for them not working well together is that it's almost like somebody made a vase out of clay and somebody else made a vase out of Lego. You've both of them are vases, but they've been achieved using different models which don't necessarily work well together. So no is the simple answer to that one. There isn't interoperability between them, and it means that we are, for instance, right now, we're speaking to a football team in Spain called Real Madrid, and they wish us to create a really interesting kind of mid-match and pre-match animation that's augmented of a dragon or a giant robot appearing out of the pitch, and that would appear on the main screens in the stadium. And we would use Unreal for that because we need it to be very, very pretty, but not necessarily interactive. But simultaneously, they need people to be able to hold up their phones and see the same thing happening on their phones and interact with it. For that, we'd need to simultaneously run Unity. So it would be two separate builds running at the same time on completely different systems. So the actual level of interaction between the two systems is very, very limited. But as far as the users are concerned, they're just watching the same thing in different mediums.
I see, and that's only because you're using two device screens, right?
Partially, and it's partially because if for instance, if Unreal lent itself better to working on mobile phones, we would be able to use Unreal for the whole thing, and our life would be a lot easier. If Unity was prettier and would look good enough on a great big screen in a stadium, then we would just use Unity, and again, our lives would be easier. Unfortunately, they both have their strengths and weaknesses, so we have to use both.
And so, is it deliberate that they have such a disparity between the two, or from a business standpoint, or you think it's just a matter of time before they're going to be able to be overlaid on one another, depending on how you want to use them and what screen you're going to deliver the experience on or through?
I suspect, again, another good question, I suspect what's more likely is that they will get to a stage of parity whereby you could choose either for any task. So there wouldn't be any need to use them together because they would both be as good as each other. At the moment, the Lego and clay vase analogy holds sound because Lego is obviously easier to build, but is going to create a kind of a rougher, more angular vase, whereas clay requires more skill, but it's going to create and takes a bit more hassle because you have to bake it in an oven, but it's going to give you a nicer result.
All my clients are corporations that are building business to business, business to consumer, and business to employee, like upskill training. I'm curious, when you pick a designer to work on either a 3D Unity or an Unreal Engine in order to design an experience in a business setting, it's important that that designer understand the business mission and the problem they're trying to solve. So I'm assuming that the people that are doing your work right now aren't looking at an end business, but more of an entertainment experience that's being delivered. Am I wrong?
Actually, well, no. For instance, the Real Madrid gigs that we've got at the moment and the ones with Coca-Cola are more entertainment, but that's actually quite rare for us. Our general clientele is very similar to yours from the sounds of it. So, for instance, with Disney, they're looking for internal training. Soft skills and practical training, warehouse training, retail training, that kind of thing. We're doing some work with nurseries where again it's training and education. We're doing some internal what would you call it? Onboarding training for a large financial organisation called Nucleus, based in Edinburgh. And so for all of these, we're using different or what is deemed to be appropriate tools for
And
these.
then how does that change the kind of skill set you look for in your partial reality developer?
It doesn't necessarily, well, I mean, in my case, I'm lucky because, as I say, I have very broadly skilled developers. So they tend to be able to lend themselves or turn their hands to most applications. But I have to be very careful. My role in my organization, apart from director, is with a background in marketing, which is about 70
Yeah, I
odd
saw
percent.
that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's about 70% research, and it's mainly about, before you actually come out with any content. And therefore, I tend to really get to know the client as much as is possible. I get to know their users as much as is possible. And then once we work that out, we then work out what would be an appropriate suite of tools that we could then deliver. We will run these past the client and the users for pros and cons, and then eventually together we'll settle on what's the most appropriate solution. And then I will choose Derek or Stephen according to the devices that are being used to play it back, i.e., mobile phone is going to be Unity, virtual reality is going to be Unreal, and then we build based on that. But I've usually by that point created a very detailed proposal in terms of deliverable outcomes, user experience levels, time, involvement, equipment, etc. Which then I sit and spend quite a lot of time with the development team or my development
So
manager.
you do start with the typical design project cycle that we have in 2D, where you designing these educational or business applications with, is it, you said 70% research, so is it quantitative research you're doing as well?
It's both. It's as we were describing earlier on in the call. So we start off by meeting people and talking to them in depth, small amount of people, and then based on that, we will speak to a larger number of people. Taking the questions or the outcomes of the qualitative, and then getting statistically significant results from that. Then we'll do another.
So you're actually starting with qualitative research, exactly as you had previously stated, because you don't have a product yet. No one's moving through any experience yet, right?
No, that's right. It's very much a kind of a theoretical framework that we then build up a very, very clear picture of the requirements. And then we will start. When we originally started it was marketing and video, online video marketing. So it was a very, very similar approach where we would establish and do research on the client and the customers. And then upon that, the timing, etc., the platforms like social media, online, offline, etc., the users, the times of year, times a month, and then based on that, we would then create the content, and that meant that things were a lot more efficient. And we do basically exactly the same thing now that we're
However,
working.
does Disney and these other companies, they have a lot of quantitative research already. Do they give that to you, and then you take that in order to determine, who's your user, right? What's their
Yeah.
demographic? What's their age? What's right? I mean, you look at that data first before you build a theoretical framework, right?
Well, it depends how much secondary and pre-existing data there already is. You would be surprised how little data there is in terms of their internal training. Their external work, anything that's B2C, they've got absolutely tons of information on, and some of that we'll gather from them, secondary internal, some secondary external, but actually when it comes to internal training, it's extremely it's extremely disparate, nebulous.
Yeah, because they haven't been doing it in any consistent way. So we've got the visual designer and a little bit about how their life is going to be different, because they're going to have to use 3D Unity or Unreal as a tool, right? That's going to be a tool that they'll need to know. Is that correct? In order to move off of 2D into 3D, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then the developer, the partial reality developer, can you modify the language in 3D Unity and Unreal to make a native experience? Is it an open platform for developers to use and modify the code?
Could you clarify what you mean by that?
Well, you said 3D Unity and Unreal is more not like a platform, although they're working to do that, but more of a language, so to speak. And so your partial reality developers have to learn how to speak that language in quotes, right? But let's say they want to, they're innovating during the design process, which happens in 2D. And they see that there's something else that they might be able to tweak the 3D Unity, for example, to do that 3D hadn't thought about doing. But in order to do it, they have to add or modify the language, right?
I understand what you mean. I understand what you mean. Absolutely. If you have if you have a skilled enough developer, then they will be able to actually make changes right down to the actual coding language level, which means that they have full control over absolutely everything. Now, the also given how mature both Unity and Unreal are, it does allow a degree of flexibility, even if you aren't a coder, even if you aren't actually at that level, as long as you can find that information. The thing about digital development, as you'll have no doubt encountered yourself with the 2D, is that there's so many people working on this stuff and talking about it and discovering things and sharing what they've discovered that in a lot of cases it's a question of ongoing research. Somebody says, I would like to achieve this. I would like to make this object semi-opaque and then change its opacity depending on who's using it, etc. Then they just first thing that they do is they look and see if somebody else has already worked out how to do it. And then they just follow those instructions. Although there is still a very rapidly growing body of experience, of collective experience, simply because of the sheer volume of people that are working in this and the nature of the people who work in this environment. They like to talk about what they do.
Your partial reality developers do both the visual and the shaping and the coding, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
do all three. Is that because there are not enough people that specialize in one area that understand that and can use that technology, and that eventually you're going to have a molecular structure of designers that fall into appearance or modeling or testing?
Yes, I would suggest that you're exactly right. I think that the larger the organization, the more mature the discipline, and the larger the requirements, the broader the requirements, the more specialists you're going to find. It's like you'll probably have encountered this yourself when you go in and meet a client, and the client's organization is small. It tends to have a smaller number of people with a wider range of knowledge and a greater level of overlap. Whereas when you arrive in a larger organization with a steeper, taller hierarchy, almost everybody's a specialist. And that means that they do have very, very deep knowledge of what they do, sometimes to the detriment of their ability to communicate, and some things can get lost in the translation. But largely speaking, you get economies out of it. Our organization certainly is at an early stage in that. I have encountered other organizations that use the likes of Unity and Unreal, mainly gaming companies who have very large contingents, very, very large teams of specialists. They don't seem to be there.
And in gaming, visual is animation, right?
Well, actually, the difference between gaming and virtual reality, which we use for corporate and commercial purposes, is very, very slight in terms of how it's done. I mean, it's the same gaming engines. It's Unity and Unreal. It's the same modeling and graphics packages which are used in 3D for gaming, because obviously the gaming industry is the one that really allowed for the virtual reality industry to get to the level that it has.
3D Unity is AR, and then Unreal is VR.
Well, you can use both for both. Unity is better for AR because because at the moment AR is mostly being used on less powerful devices like mobile phones and so forth, and Unity lends itself to that. Unreal is better. It can be used for AR. It can be used for augmented reality, but it tends to be a little bit heavy. It's very, very pretty. So
when you say heavy, what do you mean heavy?
Lots and lots of data, lots of processing, lots of.
And that's why it's best used for corporate applications, because they've got a lot of big, heavy data sets, right?
They do. In a lot of cases with the corporate applications, they're not looking for it to be so pretty. The prettiness factor in terms of how realistic it is and so forth is a major component on the heaviness factor. You know, the more light sourcing and what we call material properties, like for instance, if a piece of furniture is covered in leather, the material properties of that model will be that it will have a degree of reflectivity, a degree of opacity, a degree of texture, color, etc., etc. All of this takes a lot of data. Whereas if you're using something like Unity, your material properties might be quite simple and straightforward. Or if you're using a corporate package, it might not matter whether your chair looks like it's made of leather, as long as it's a red
Right.
chair.
I guess, I'm feeling my way through this in the dark, but as you
No,
use,
you're doing well.
okay, as you use AI and machine learning, you're applying it to the development cycle, or both, I'm assuming, right? Whether you're using Unreal or 3D Unity, in order to get a better predictive experience for the user moving through that space. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's the use of artificial intelligence is a lot rarer than many think, because in most applications, to be honest with you, it's a phrase which is used frequently to really what's being described isn't artificial intelligence in most cases. What's being described is maybe machine learning, frequently just algorithmical learning, like an algorithm that observes something and responds in the same way
So
the next.
you're using, thank you for that. So you're using Unreal, I'm assuming, in, let's say, the Disney internal trading experience that you're designing. I'm assuming you're using Unreal, right?
Yes, we would be. We would be. And although we're still at the stage where we're trying to work out how much of what we're training them in is going to be augmented reality and how much of it is going to be virtual reality. And as I mentioned before, well, actually, what I didn't mention was that it's surprising how unsophisticated some of the physical hardware and equipment is being used by even these larger, on the face of it, very wealthy corporations. And you'll
But
find
when
that
you're saying a hardware, are you talking about a wearable?
I'm talking about anything from a laptop to, yes, a wearable or a handset, anything which would be used as a means of interacting with the program.
But when you're using machine learning, that's going to be a key component into individualizing the training experience, for example, for the Disney internal training application, right?
Yep.
Because you're going to have people coming in not only at different skill levels, but also at different intellectual levels on how they process information and learn, right? Someone might learn very quickly in 5 minutes, and you'll be able to understand how that person moves through information to grasp a particular learning bite, for example. And then you'll be able to, that machine learning will unify the algorithm, modify the algorithm based on the individual.
Well, actually, I think with Disney, because they are at such an early stage with their training and that they don't really have any homogenization or consistency between their training, I suspect that we're not going to be approaching a machine learning approach here. We're going to actually start by using traditional teacher and students learning, whereby there actually is a physical person who is guiding the learning, either for a small number of people or a large number of people, just as it would be done in a classroom. The difference being that these people don't have to be physically in the same space. So that in itself creates massive economies for Disney, because they're not having to, fly people to different places or, to take them off work and so forth. It also means that they're not having to fly their trainers around in different places, so they can train like 3 people in San Antonio, 5 people in Melbourne, and 2 people in Dubai.
Yeah, it's like training a pilot in a cockpit where you have people sitting in other areas that are in on that experience of the person being trained, and they can tell how they're doing, right? Or how the software is even doing.
Yes.
And how are they in AR now? Augmented reality, you have to use a head glass. I mean, you have to use a headset. as opposed to a Google Glass? How do you experience VR? Is that through a Google Glass?
You would experience VR through either a wearable, an HDU, which just stands for head-mounted display unit, and there's various different ones of these. There's ones which are tethered, which means that they're attached to a PC by a cable, and the PC does all the processing. There's ones which are untethered, which means that they don't have to be attached to anything. They're not as powerful because all the processing takes place in the device itself. Then you've got ones which are external tracking. Now, external tracking means that they can see how you're moving around by means of actual sensors which are placed around the room, but those are difficult to set up and they require a degree of specialism. They can be a hassle. So the other option is something called inside-out tracking rather than outside-in, whereby the device itself knows where it is, so you don't need any sensors or set up in the room. You just put on the headset and you can walk around. It will also work out where the walls
When you walk around with the headset on, you have no outside view, only what's inside what you're looking at, right? I mean, you don't know that there's a lamp that you're going to knock over if you walk to the right, correct?
It's a very good point, but actually they have worked this one out. So what they do is there are little cameras in the device. There's usually between 2 and 4, and there's also ranging hardware. Now ranging is either through little lasers or infrared ranging sensors. What these basically do is just like our eyes do. They sense how far away things are. You're not necessarily seeing them when you're in your virtual world. The headset is. So if you then start to move towards something like a lamp or a wall or a chair or another obstacle, it will notify you. It will create something called a mesh, which is like it sounds. It's like a little net of a chair or a table, so that you know that you're about to walk into it and you can stop before you do.
And is that spatial computing?
All of this is defined as spatial computing. So augmented reality, virtual reality, that's all defined as under the broad brush.
So would it be called spatial mesh computing?
No, in this case, that would just be, now what is that called? I think it's called an area warning mesh, but I think there's different people call it different things. But
yeah, of course.
Yeah, the thing to look at and what to do just to give your, because all this stuff is, it took me a while to get my head around it, and the quickest way to understand it is to watch it or experience it. So what I would take a note of is look at a video on the Oculus Go or the Oculus Quest, probably the Oculus Quest. And then videos showing people using these will demonstrate exactly what I've said. These are inside-out tracking, head-mounted display units with those little cameras. And in those videos, you'll almost certainly be shown what these meshes look like when they appear, because you can even see.
So, yeah, sure. No, I understand. Thank you for that. And so the wearer is going to be made aware that they're about to make a wrong turn, right? A light might go off on the upper right-hand side, or how do they, while there's cameras and there's laser beams that help create that mesh, right, of knowledge of where things physically are in a space you're currently using.
It will visually show this to the user. So they will
through the headset, it'll say there's a lamp here.
It will actually create the model, the mesh of the lamp will appear in the user's field of view. So it won't be as real looking. It won't be the same looking as the actual virtual experience.
It's more like the 3D Unity, which gives you almost a toy-like visual.
Yes, that's right.
And so let me ask you this. Don't you think headsets are a bridge to holographic experiences?
I do. At the moment, we, our ability to create holographic experiences is limited. We can do it on a very, very limited level using lasers. It's almost like if you look back to the very original televisions, and it was these kind of murky green line drawings on a screen. That's kind of what we can do with holographic experiences. The problem is, of course, there's no substrate, there's no material. Unless you fill a chamber with an even mist, there's nothing for these lasers or things to bounce off to actually then reflect it back at your
You'd have to have some kind of mist screen that would be that these things could bounce off of, and therefore give you the illusion that there is someone in your house, for example, right? And so, what is the difference between creating that future experience using holographic technology and mist screens to currently being able to see 3D projection iconography through a Google Glass, right?
Well, there's basically nothing in terms of the worlds that we program, whether they be in virtual or augmented reality, or whether they ultimately end up being projected as a hologram. The actual models that we create are going to be exactly the same. The only thing that's going to differ is the hardware that's used to
deliver the experience. And so there's no need for the UX designer to learn something new for projected holographic experiences. They'll be able to transfer that to that environment through the hardware, right? As the hardware matures, right?
That's a very interesting thought.
Do you think 3D Unity and Unreal are going to be developing that projected experience, or is that going to be another company altogether? And if so, whom?
A bunch of good questions. It's unlikely that Unity and Unreal will develop this technology because they are more of software companies rather than hardware companies. I would suspect if anybody was going to be developing the projection hardware, it's going to be Panasonic. And the reason I say that is that I work with projection mapping. Now, projection mapping is probably a bridge between what we're talking about and holography. Projection mapping, you may have seen it online. It's where you'll see, for instance, the front of a building, and things are being projected onto it as you would project onto a flat cinema screen, but the actual projected things seem to be interacting with the shape of the building. So things might seem to go behind columns, or windows might seem to open or close. It would actually respond to the thing that it's looking at and project accordingly. That's projection mapping, because what it's doing is it's using the same ranging hardware, lasers and infrared, that I was talking about for the headsets, to actually detect the shape of the building or whatever it's projecting against, and then modify the image, the projection, so that it fits in with that. It's an art form, really, and it's used for large events and opening events. It's very, very.
And who would? And when you say it's projection mapping, what kind of technical skill do you have to have in order to do that?
Well, a combination. Have you ever met a VJ? The people that will be a nightclub with a DJ, but what they're doing, instead of mixing music, they're mixing images. Well, it's akin to VJing if it's being done live. If it's pre-recorded, it's akin to choreography or film design or animation design. It also requires a degree of understanding of 3D spatial, stuff like that.
So a person who specializes in CAD design and is an architect, right?
Yeah, they could potentially do it.
An interesting person in terms of an academic skill set to ramp up quickly developing projection mapping for that kind of experience.
Well, yes, in terms of technical ability, but no in terms of creative ability, because somebody that's technically proficient in CAD and architecture are good at making a structure, but a structure which doesn't move. A structure that you can move within, but in it itself, it isn't animated. Whereas with projection mapping, that's the key. It tends to be very heavily animated. There's loads of stuff going on to capture people's imagination, which is why I think it's more akin to what's likely going to turn into holography, because there's not much point in having a hologram which just sits there. You may as well have a sculpture.
So go ahead.
The reason that to get back to the point now, who's going to actually develop this technology, the reason I say Panasonic is that Panasonic currently create the cutting edge projectors, for projection mapping. They're brighter, they're better, they understand the shapes around them. They just seem to have really pushed into that field. So I would suspect if anybody were to get to the holography, making it real before anybody else, it's likely to be Panasonic.
What are the skill sets of those that are creating that cutting edge projection mapping experience?
Well, actually, it's very, very similar to the skill sets that are required for augmented and virtual reality to a certain extent. And I was having a conversation about this recently, and I realized it's the most broad-ranging set of skill requirements that anybody has ever required, because, as I mentioned before, you need to be a designer, a visual designer. You need to be a sculptor because you need to understand the shapes of things and the depth and form and so forth, the geometry. You need to be a coder or a computery type person to not be afraid of the technology and to have the ability to learn frequently complex packages. You need to be an animator because you need to actually understand movement and how things move, which is wildly complex now that I've been learning about it. If you're, for instance, animating something which is say a robot, where it's a bunch of static, solid things which are jointed together, that's quite easy. If you're animating a face or an animal, you've got to make sure that the skin stretches in the right way and bunches up in the right way, and that this is very difficult. Elasticity, you've got to program that stuff in. That's the kind of thing that animators are very, very good at. You've also got to have an understanding of physics, gravity, the speed at which things drop, the speed at which heavier things move or lighter things move differently. Like if you look at a bird moves in fast, jerky motions because its skeletal system is like a honeycomb, and it's lighter, so it has less momentum, it has less inertia, so its movements can be very, very fast and jerky. Whereas we, as ground-based mammals, we've got much more solid, heavier bones, so we don't move like that. An animator will instinctively know that's a bird, so it moves this way. That's a mammal, so that moves this way. And if you get those things wrong, the whole illusion just falls to pieces.
Becomes unreal. And
exactly.
So, but to be able to find someone who's a visual designer, a sculptor, a coder, an animator, has a physics, I mean, what the heck?
Tell me about it.
I think one person is going to do that, or again, it's the same thing that as the industry becomes more mature, that it will break into different specialty areas that will then come together to build the experience.
Yes, and yes. Yeah. There's always going to be a requirement for a very, very broadly overlapping Venn diagram, though. I suspect that if you get people who are too specialist or too siloed off in their specialisms, the thing will fall apart.
Well, then that's going to point to how you build design teams for the future, because that's a whole nother discussion. When you mentioned coder, what kind of coding? What are they coding in?
Well, if it's Unity, I always get these two mixed up. I think if it's Unity, it's C#, and if it's Unreal, it's C++.
Wow.
Now, C languages
That's scientific language, isn't it? C++.
Yeah. They're all obviously based on the C kind of broader language, so there are more dialects of those languages. Also, wow. Unreal lends itself more to what's called node-based programming, so it's almost, as I understand it, because I'm not actually a specialist in coding, as I understand it, node-based systems are almost modular. You can almost bolt them together a wee bit like Lego, whereas with Unity, it's much more code-based. You're literally writing it as you're going along.
I see. And so one thing that you didn't mention when you talked about the broad breadth of skills that will be required to design in the space, you didn't mention business acumen.
That's the one thing where if you can get somebody who's got a broad enough understanding of what is largely possible with these different systems, it's quite good to have somebody who's separate. So in my organization, that's my job. I've been working with organizations on different levels for different purposes for over 20 years, but I've also been working with techs, web developers, animation developers, filmmakers, and so forth all that period. So I kind of know how to speak their language, but I also know how to speak business language, and I tend to focus everything on quantifiable, desirable business goals and outcomes and objectives.
Of course. I mean, if you're not solving a problem, man, you're not doing your job. At least in my world. And so,
Absolutely.
you know, part of so you really have to have a you have to keep a firm rein on the overarching business mission and continually reiterate and reinforce with your designers. Otherwise, they could go off the rails, right?
Yes, I think the best phrase is it's like herding cats, my job. But
Yeah, exactly. I would think, but you know, moving forward into business, as business starts to engage more in the use of AR, VR for communication or corporate application purposes, um, is it going to be easier to teach a business UX designer um, the skill sets in coding and maybe sculpting?
it
Or is it
seems
going to be easier to teach someone who's a coder and an animator the business?
that's interesting. I suspect that those are always going to remain separate unless you get a very unusually cognizant individual who happens to have, you know, business acumen and animation acumen at the same time. I think that those functions are likely to remain separate, whereas the actual as I mentioned before, you know, we will get a degree of separation of specialisms, but they'll have to remain overlapping. I think that what's happening at the moment in terms of the development of the technology, particularly with augmented reality, is that there's lots and lots of people out there trying to make bolt and build platforms, very much like they did with websites about 10, 15 years ago, where we moved from you have to be a web designer and build this thing from scratch to we started using content managed systems, CMSs. So imagine something like WordPress or Wix or Squarespace, you know, where anybody can really just bolt together their own website
So
because
it'll be sort of like you said, the module. It'll be a load-based system that has module components that are turnkey that the designer can pick and choose from. That's already done the heavy development lifting, right, so to speak.
exactly, exactly. Now there will always be a need, just as there is with websites, for people who can do more sophisticated stuff from scratch. But the majority of people are now using the likes of WordPress and Squarespace and so forth.
I want to really understand VR is headset delivered experience, whether it's tethered, untethered, or inside out tracking, etc.
Yep.
That's VR. AR, how do you get that experience? What?
Well, the best analogy that I've been given, because AR currently is mostly through tablets and mobile phones. You know, it's something called pass.
Tell me, give me an experience of an AR experience delivered on my tablet.
Okay. So you imagine you point your tablet at an object, and that object is recognized by your tablet as an image, let's say, which we call a tracker. So that tracker, that image might be of a circle with the line through it. And it goes, okay, I know what that is. And when I see that, that means that I need to project something over the top of it. In this case, I don't know, it's a face, and the face is talking. It also recognizes that when you move the camera away, it still focuses on that tracker. It still focuses on that original circle with the line through it, and make sure that that face stays over that
Now, the
tracker.
way you do that is you press like a pause or a save button so that as you move your tablet to another area, you still have the circle image that you originally put the face over the chair on showing on the tablet.
No, it does it automatically. So it just goes, okay, I see that. I recognize that. I need to have a face there. And as the camera moves, as you move the phone around, the augmented reality system knows that the phone is moving, partially because of the change of what's happening on the screen, and partially because of the accelerometer in the tablet or the phone, which says this object is moving up or down or left or right. And so it will do something called persistent tracking. And persistent tracking is that it will remember where that object was in space in relation to you, and it will always keep that virtual object in the same.
Why do I want to do that? I mean, what am I doing?
Well, if you were, for instance, we've used this for onboarding of people in large buildings. So, in terms of recruitment, so they're arriving in a large building, they need to be able to walk through that building and bring up their phone, and that phone says, canteen is this way. So an arrow will appear in front of them with a sign saying, okay, this is the way to the canteen. They say, well, I don't want to go to the canteen, I want to go to the finance department. Another arrow will
I
appear.
see. So we'll use it for wayfinding, right?
Yep, yep.
And then
And then
what about using it? So I'm entering a building and or I'm a city worker
hmm,
and I need to find out where the lines are laid underground before I start digging, right?
yes,
And
absolutely.
the condition those lines are in, right? Where what needs to be repaired proactively, maintaining the city's infrastructure. Would I use AR tablet to do that?
You would have to have something which was actually in underground observing those lines, because they would then stream the information to the tablet. So as the
Oh,
person standing on the street, to them it would be like looking through an X-ray, which is actually just cutting through the street down to where the actual cables are and showing them the condition.
so
But the
as I build new infrastructure in this country, I need to understand that I'm going to have to place hardware, software, scannables underground in order to be able to show people above ground what's going on.
Yes, absolutely, it's a good idea though. I like it.
Interesting. And then also it's good if this AR experience is great for obviously retail shopping. I
Yeah.
want a pair of shoes. I want to know, let's say I want to know what the shoe's made of. I can scan, right, that scanner on the shoe, and that AR program on my tablet will allow me to see the ingredients, whether it's food or it's an item.
Absolutely, there are some complexities to that, because if for instance, if it was responding to a tracker in the shoe, like a sticker inside on the sole, or on the inlay of the shoe, that was a certain color or shape or whatever, that's a very simple thing for the AR to recognize, because it's largely speaking is going to look the same no matter what angle you look at it from. Whereas the shoe, when you think about it, is a 3D object. So trying to get it to recognize just the shoe is difficult, because it has to recognize that shoe from every possible angle. Bearing in mind that augmented reality doesn't have intelligence of its own, you have to literally say, here is this shoe from 500 different angles, same shoe, you have to respond in this way. But that makes it heavier and difficult to do.
As AR becomes more containable, right, tangible, I guess the ability to see an object in 3D via using my phone is something that's soon to come.
Yes, I would say so. Although I've had arguments with other people who are more, you would be surprised, there's actually already traditionalists in the augmented reality industry, even though it's only been around for a few years. And there's people that say, no, it can only recognize 2D things, and it will only ever be able to recognize 2D things. And my take on this, because I've been, doing this kind of tech for 20 years, is that everything changes and everything develops. And it's inevitable that with the increases in processor speed, memory,
Has to change. Yeah, we don't even know what's around the corner. And isn't traditionalist and VR an oxymoron?
yes, absolutely. You would think so, wouldn't you?
I
But there
mean,
are a surprising amount of people who are already going the Luddite route.
I bought a very cumbersome piece of hardware that would project what I saw on my screen. These are never some years ago.
Mm.
That I could project on the wall and watch whatever movie I wanted to watch on the wall. I didn't need another device like a television or a screen to do it.
Mm.
And am I going to be able, or can you do that yet, where you can actually project what you're seeing on your iPhone onto a wall?
Yes, actually, you can buy a piece of hardware that costs about £20, and then you just slide your phone in there, and it will project it onto the wall. So
How large can it get before the image becomes unclear?
well, it uses ultra bright LEDs, so it doesn't require a lot of power, and it's same with the Panasonic projectors that I mentioned before. It can actually go quite a distance. So I've not actually used one personally, but I believe that you can get up to something like, let's see, uh, probably about 7 or 8 meters by about 5 meters.
Wow, that's pretty large. And the reason I ask that question is moving to giving a more projected experience off of my cell phone, if you could do that with a 20-pound device that gives you a projection already onto a wall, right? Or some flat something, or whatever you want to project it on, even if it's, you know, an item like a chair.
Yeah.
Isn't the bridge to making the 3D recognition of, let's say, the shoe, for example, by modifying or tweaking that kind of technology that's already available to us so cheaply?
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. Yes, but in a slightly different way. There's a thing that we do called photogrammetry, which is it's a little bit like what I described for the headsets, where they use the ranging, you know, the infrared and the laser ranging to work out the shape of the room that's around you and the objects in it. But it's slightly more sophisticated in that it can then recreate these objects very quickly and very accurately. So we would use that instead of trying to build a Coca-Cola can. We would just scan a Coca-Cola can. So we would just walk around it with either a camera or a thing that, you know, an object which we have, which is it's got lasers in it and everything, and it can work out the shape and the colors and the patterns that are on there, and then it's clever enough to then put all this together and create a model automatically.
Do you have to have like a tripod holding it steady as you make the circular motion around the object in order to get it in a 3D image? Or is the technology not so sensitive that I could actually hand hold my iPhone and move around that shoe?
We're literally just on the cusp of that becoming commonplace, what you just described. And previously, you're right, you did have to use a turntable that would move it in very specific ways, a very specific speed, and everything was working together, the motors and the camera and the software. But now, because the phones are getting so clever, the new Galaxy Note 10, for instance, has got built-in photogrammetry. They just released this, I think it was today, this information. It might have been earlier this week. And it's got 7 cameras in there, and it can do this thing that I'm talking about, this photogrammetry, because it's looking at it from 7 eyes simultaneously, and it also knows, because of the accelerometer in the phone, that knows what height and what speed it's moving at and so forth.
Is that Samsung product?
It's Samsung, and then the Huawei ones, the Chinese make, almost certainly will be able to do this. They're very sophisticated.
As the phone gets so sophisticated, now you can put it on a drone, right? You have like you have an iPhone drone. That's going to make the experience for the user more seamless, because I'm not holding onto a device, right? I'm just allowing it to flutter above me and be able to, depending on how or what I'm trying to create or snapshot, it'll be an automatic capture.
I see what you mean. So using the drone to actually capture the objects, yeah, I dare say that's possible. Funnily enough, we actually do something like that, but it's a much more manual process where we use professional drones, and we'll orbit them around buildings, and then we'll be able to create a 3D model of that building. And then once we've created that, we can then demolish the building. We can add solar panels and design on there. We can check out the condition of the roof or the walls and that kind of thing, and then send that to surveyors who would normally have to visit in person. Now they can analyze a whole number of buildings in one day from their office without having to actually go there. So, but what you're describing would be to actually have a very small drone that's just attached to your phone and is to a certain extent intelligent enough to just take the data or the information for you. And right. Yes, that sounds entirely possible. In fact, I want one.
The other thing I want to talk to you about is privacy. But when we go to, so AR is tablet or web delivered, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then VR is headset.
Yes, however, actually, I'm glad you brought me back to this, because I never really finished with the AR thing. AR is inevitably going to move to being headset delivered as well, and that probably is going to really be the leader in terms of this becoming a ubiquitous technology. The only problems that we have currently with AR being head-mounted is that the head mounts are quite heavy. They're a bit silly looking. You wouldn't want to walk down the street with them, and they require, however, there's newer technology. There's, for instance, there's the Magic Leap headset, which is still a bit silly and a bit heavy, but
I think it's pretty silly, yeah.
Yeah. However, have you heard of the Nreal?
And who makes that?
It's the company is called Nreal, similar to the Magic Leap. However, it's better.
And so Nreal allows You were talking about how AR is going to move to headset rather than
Yes.
web. And is that then going to
Well,
blur the
Nreal looks
line between AR and VR?
very much. Nreal looks like a pair of Ray-Bans. It doesn't look
Oh,
unusual at
wow.
all. I know. And the processing takes place in something called a puck. Now, this is the same as with the Magic Leap. So it's a separate little thing the size of a hockey puck.
I've had a demo of Magic Leap.
Ah, so you've seen that, you've tried it, yeah. So it's very like that. It's set. Nreal's even cleverer than that because they use a USB-C connector. So do you have a Samsung phone yourself or
No,
an
I
Apple?
have an iPhone. I'm
Right.
I'm 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 captive. I'm a prisoner to the Apple ecosystem.
I managed to break free a couple of years ago, but it
Oh
was
man, good
painful.
for you. So it has a
um,
puck, and then it's got a UBS adapter.
Well, yes. So
A
the
USB.
Nreal has got a USB-C adapter, which is basically, you know how you got your Lightning adapter, your Lightning connection on your iPhone.
Yeah.
It's basically the USB-C is just another version of that, but it's a slightly less proprietary version. It works on a number of different devices, right? Now, what they've done with the Nreal is that it has a USB-C connector, which means instead of having to buy the headset from Magic Leap and the puck that's got the processor and everything, you just need to attach your Nreal headset to your phone, your Samsung phone, because it's
And you
got,
do that, you have to literally attach it with a cord.
yeah, the cable, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you can't, it's not wireless yet. Will it be wireless in the future?
It
Bluetooth
could
connected?
be, although somebody actually pointed out to me that that could actually be dangerous. I don't know whether he's right or not, but he
Pull
was
our head up?
suggesting, yeah, he was suggesting that having that much information being streamed directly in or around your head could potentially be a cancer risk. I don't know whether he's right about that or not. I'm not an expert, but certainly in terms of simplicity and reliability of signal, a cable is the best way, particularly when that cable is light. It's attached to the back. Imagine let's say the left leg of the Ray-Ban glasses. At the very tip of that is just got a wee thing that you can plug your USB-C cable into, and
And
then
then into your phone.
yeah, you plug the other end into your phone, and your phone
So then
does the.
you need really heavy duty processing in your phone in order to deliver the kind of rich content and information that you're going to want.
Well, that's the beauty of this is that your phone, particularly the modern phones, have got something called a Snapdragon processor, which is a very, very small, light, powerful processor. It's the same thing that Magic Leap are using in their puck. So instead of buying a separate piece of hardware with the same chip in it, Nreal are just leveraging a piece of hardware that you likely already own.
Oh, wow, cool. And so, one of my big beefs with Magic Leap headset is I'm an eyeglass wearer, right? I have to wear glasses.
Hmm.
And so I would think, and you let me know if this is doable, rather than I having to go to Magic Leap and in addition to the cost of the headset, I have to buy lenses that I insert in the headset if I'm going to use it moving forward. Can't I give my eyeglass prescription to Magic Leap and they automatically put it in the software so that everything I see is adjusted to my visual ability, my eyesight?
Well, no, that's a good point. And again, I'm no expert in ophthalmology. However, from my understanding, Nreal and I think actually some of the other ones as well are making it so that they are prescriptions. So you can basically just send them your prescription, and just like when you buy glasses normally, they'll just send you the version of the Nreal headset, which is adapted to your prescription.
Well,
But
the Ray-Ban, you said it looks like a Ray-Ban eyeglass, right?
yes, that's right. That's
So
right.
there I get it. I just buy a prescription pair of Ray-Bans. But in
Yeah.
Magic Leap, you're stuck with this, what to me was uncomfortable headset to begin with. And
Hmm.
then, I've got no peripheral experience at all, where the Nreal, you're going to have peripheral experience. And part of making decisions in everyday life is you've got to think about different things at the same time. So having that peripheral capability while having an augmented or virtual experience to me is healthy. But with Magic Leap, just because I can get a lens and stick it in and then put this contraption on my head,
Hmm.
I mean, doesn't that mean that headset is eventually going to go away?
Yes, I suspect it will.
I was wondering about Magic Leap. Is there a kernel of software that Magic Leap has that's so unique that gives a much more enriched full-bodied immersive experience that could become a standard ingredient in any uh, wearable, no matter who manufactures it, so that Magic Leap could make its money off of that proprietary kernel of software?
Unlikely. The software itself is likely to remain Unreal or Unity,
Oh,
both of
wow.
which have their own way of making money. I believe that Unity's way of doing it is that once you're making a certain, you can make things in Unity for free, but as soon as you're selling them commercially, you have to give them a proportion of your net profits. It's something like 20%. But that means that loads and loads of people will develop things because the system that they're doing it on is free. And then if they make something that they can make money, they'll usually be quite happy to pay a small proportion of that to the people that allowed them to do it. So that seems to be the model. Now, the model by which Magic Leap works is a hardware model, and the model by which Unity and Unreal work is a software model or a software as a service model. So they'll probably continue to lead the way. But there is something called an SDK, the developers kit, sort of free developers kit, which a lot of these physical hardware platforms are bringing out to enable people to build stuff for them, that will work on a Magic Leap and so forth. It's going to be more limited. It wouldn't work across different devices. It would only work on that device. This is what Apple is almost certainly going to do. When Apple have their own augmented reality system, it will be proprietary. It will
But
be.
Apple doesn't have what's Apple? But Apple doesn't have a headset like a Magic Leap or an Oculus, right?
No, they haven't released one yet. The theory is that they do have one, but they're holding back.
Is this Apple product going to be like an eyeglass, or is it going to be a headset?
Who knows? Most likely an eyeglass.
Oh,
Most likely they'll try to make
that's
it
good. Yeah,
fashionable.
absolutely. That makes all the sense in the world.
Hmm.
Well, gosh, we've had such a wonderful conversation, and I know that there's more to be had. So I'm hoping you're open to a part two.
Yes, of course, of course.
And
There'll no doubt have been a lot of changes by the time we meet again, even if we were to talk in a week, probably.
oh, that is so true. I'm just trying to keep up, and I'm trying to inform, my candidates and clients that are specialists in user experience design, what is coming and what they need to do to prepare to design in that space. And this has really helped
Good.
quite a bit.
I'm glad. Well, it's good for me as well because it allows me to actually see things from a broader perspective and crystallize the landscape. Because there's so many moving parts, as you can tell, it's very, very easy for me to cease to see the forest for the trees. And it's my job to see the forest for the trees because my developers are the ones that are right down in there amongst the foliage.
Well, David, thank you very much. I
My pleasure. Thank
appreciate it.
you.
And we'll talk again soon, I hope.
I look forward to it.
Okay,
Take
me
care.
too. Bye bye.
Bye bye, Ella. Bye bye.